the sheer existence of a profit motive in the criminal justice system is something that has received tremendous criticism, a lot of light shown on that particular piece of the puzzle here because of the role that private prisons and their rise has played in driving the rise of mass incarceration in this country. And you brought in the link as well to immigrant detention centers. But I want to sort of cut through a lot of the theoretical, abstract sounding discussion here and really get to the human consequences. One of the things that your book really makes, does that's different than a lot of the discussion and the media coverage around this issue is it puts a human face on the people who are caught up in this system, and who in many cases see their rights and their very humanity trampled on all over the place. I'd love for you to tell me a little bit about some of the people that you interviewed for the book who have actually spent time in private prisons.
Absolutely, Rebecca, and that's a great question. And I interviewed many incarcerated individuals, formerly incarcerated individuals, their families. I opened up a JPay account, which is also another aspect of the privatization of justice, where you pay a fee to email people who are behind bars, and then they have to pay a fee to email you back. And I spoke to a number of individuals who are still incarcerated in private facilities. And it's interesting. Some of them told me, and this is in the book, that some of the corrections officers in these private facilities were actually friendlier than government corrections officials. That some of these facilities were very nice and very clean. A lot of them complained that there was just a lack of programming, and that's a big criticism of the private prison industry. Is just that in order to cut costs, they don't provide the same level of programming that a government facility provides. But what's really interesting is that I asked every single individual who I interviewed for the book, who is incarcerated or was incarcerated in a private facility, despite maybe having had an okay, experience in one of these facilities, what did they think at the end of the day? What do they think about the idea that a private corporation owns and operates the prison they were in? And someone I interviewed for the book said something very poignant, and she said, we realized that someone has found a way to make money off of our mistakes and our pain and our misfortune. And, to one of these, this one woman I interviewed, she said it was my, oh my God, our country is so obsessed moment with incarcerating us. They think we're such bad people that they're now making money off of us. And every single person I interviewed had the same theme about, feeling, very, very uncomfortable with the idea that people were making money off of their incarceration. And, that's really important at the end of the day. My book makes a lot of recommendations for how to improve outcomes in private prisons, how to reduce recidivism rates, how to ensure there's better programming, how to ensure there's better access, accountability, transparency. All those are incredibly important. But it's still significantly important to ask, what does it mean as a country that we are making so much money off of incarceration?
So the call from advocates has widely been for the course of the past several years and long before that. But I'm thinking sort of about this most immediate wave of attention around criminal justice reform that we've seen in this particular decade. The call has been to end private prisons, that there should be no profit motive in incarcerating people in the United States of America in 2017. What does your book call for, and do you believe that truly ending private prisons, as we actually heard through some of the rhetoric and early steps during the Obama years, was that administration's goal, at least from the federal side where they had control and power? Is that a realistic goal? And if it is, how do we get there?
Well, that's an excellent question. And in the book, I explore how the private prison industry and how the privatization of justice emerged. I take a historical look, and I also make recommendations for how to change outcomes for the people who are incarcerated in private prisons and private immigration detention centers. And I mention in the book that I recognize that even asking these questions about, how we can change incentives in the private prison industry, may have more worrying moral ramifications. If it is, as a matter of principle, as some say, wrong to profit from punishment, is anything short of abolition, including proposing reforms, risking complicity in this industry? And I wrestle with that a lot in the book. And at the end of the day, this book is a story, and I tell the story through talking to incarcerated individuals, their families, corrections officers, policymakers, mayors of small towns, restaurant owners, directors of corrections, even private prison officials themselves in some cases. And I think that given the reality that President Trump is president of the United States, we have Attorney General Sessions who, certainly has ties to the private prison industry as our Attorney General. I think it's unrealistic to think that the industry will be eliminated in the near future. Given that reality, I think it's important to put pressure on these private corporations to change the incentives in their contracts. So, for example, today, most of these corporations are just incentivized to fill their beds in their detention centers, in their prisons. They are paid per individual. Sometimes they receive funding. They may receive a contract, for example, may provide that the private prison corporation get paid as if the facility is 100% full, even if it's only 50% full. Because these are things that need to change. I suggest in the book that we increase the fines on these corporations when they're non-compliant. So if they are not providing the programming that's required in the contracts, they should be fined, and fined at such an amount that they find it, difficult. They find it easier to comply with the contract than to pay the fines, and that's not happening today. So these are difficult questions, but I think at the end of the day, while the private prison corporations exist, we really do need to change incentives in the industry.